What's up, guys? This is Jan for Chess24. We're gonna have a look at arguably the most spectacular game played so far in the Tata Steel Masters 2016. This is a game from round number 9. Wei Yi, the Chinese prodigy, the 16-year-old who's chasing Magnus Carlsen's historic marks, faces David Navara, who has been in pretty much every highlight video I've done on this tournament. He's just played spectacular games throughout. The scores doesn't really reflect that for Navara. He's at 50% after a fine victory over Fabiano Caruana in round number 8. He's lost a game to Hu Yifan, but he's been involved in a couple more. Check those out. While Wei Yi, uncharacteristically, has drawn his first 8 games. People were expecting the Chinese firebrand to be a lot less solid than he has been. I've been impressed with it. He's shown that even at this level he can adjust, he can play all kinds of positions and not just tactical attacking chess. But let's see how the game went today against David Navara. What we see on the screen is not the result, but their score. They've only played once. It ended in a draw. These are the actual players. Here we have Wei Yi on the white side of the board against the Czech number 1, David Navara. And Wei Yi went for the move 1e4. No surprise there. That is the move he prefers. No surprise in the first couple moves either. Navara goes for the most popular opening there is at the highest level, the good old Berlin defense. He's tried the Caro-Kann early in the tournament, didn't go so well for him. So today he switches to the Berlin, and we've seen many people banging their heads against his endgame. This was not played in the game for more than 10 years now, or more than 15 years, if all started with Kramnik using this against Kasparov in their World Championship match in 2000. So it's no surprise that nowadays a lot of white players avoid that and they play the move d3, keeping more pieces on the board. The main line is the move played in the game, bishop c5. Here white faces a tough choice between the move c3, the move short castles, and the move played in the game that dramatically changes the structure, the move bishop takes c6. This is not played to win a pawn because of that d takes c6. Knight takes e5 is not the best idea. It runs into queen d4 with a double attack, and black is winning. The idea is just to play positionally. Black does have the 2 bishops, but his pawn structure is a little compromised, and he faces the long-term problem of what to do with the c8 bishop. The white pawn structure really restricts that light square bishop. Of course, you could exchange it for the knight on f3, but then you just have a slightly worse structure and not even the 2 bishops to show for it. So this is a line that, partly out of desperation, partly because it's interesting, has become more and more popular at the highest level. And Wei Yi plays the move that is the most popular at the moment as well, the move knight bd2. Many alternatives here, but knight bd2, pretty logical, tending to put this knight on c4, where it puts pressure on e5 and controls the crucial e3 square. Once again, there's alternatives here. Bishop e6 has been played, but Navara goes for the main line, short castles, knight to c4. Now this pawn is under attack, but black can defend it by playing knight d7, when once again takes would run into takes, takes, and queen to d4 with a double attack. Therefore, what white often does here is short castle, but a new plan has emerged. Recently, the move queen to e2, not showing his cards just yet. Rook e8, this is very logical, not only to defend the e5 pawn, but also to start the journey of the knight. The knight is not ideally placed on d7, nor was it ideally placed on f6. In its structure, it wants to go to either e6, controlling these squares, or, that might sound far-fetched, but we're gonna see in the game this can happen, to c6 after this bishop moves away, knight to b8, followed by c5 and knight to c6. Solving the problem of that knight takes precedence over black's other issues, while for white, he's at a crossroads here on what he wants to do. And the modern move is this quiet little move, bishop to d2. I've first seen it in a game played by Vishy Anand against Anish Giri, even though it might have been around even before that. Once again, not showing his cards yet. Maybe he wants to castle queenside and start an attack on the kingside, or maybe he wants to push his pawns on the queenside and castle kingside, and black has to be ready for both options. Navara plays a very logical move, the move bishop to d6. It might look a little strange, but first of all the bishop on c5 looked nice, but wasn't really doing anything, so it's used to cover this pawn and to maybe prepare one of the knight maneuvers mentioned earlier. There's an alternative here, which has also been played at the highest level, the move f6, recently seen between Nakamura and Mickey Adams, where Mickey Adams embarked on the new, at least to me, plan to go h4 and h5. Partly creating an attack, partly fighting for the white squares on the king side. It was an interesting plan, and after bishop to d6, which has the advantage compared to f6, that controls the h4 square, so no knight can jump here and to f5 anytime soon, Wei Yi decides to go for the same idea that Mickey Adams had played, the move h4. Funnily enough, this position was on display in a game running in the same round, in the same tournament, even though Wei Yi assured us, and I fully believe him, that he found this idea by himself. It was also employed by Fabiano Caruana against Sergei Karyakin, couple boards down the road. After h4, it's kind of clear that white doesn't want to castle kingside, but it's still not clear if he wants to push his pawns and start an attack, or if he wants to go h5 and then for this knight to h4 idea, followed by knight f5 mentioned earlier. In the Caruana-Karyakin game, Karyakin played the move knight f8, which seems to me to be the best move, preparing to put the knight on e6 and then determining if you want to go c5, if you want to go f6, what to do next. In some lines, bishop g4 could also be an issue. Caruana got a small edge there, but the game ended in a draw. Finally, Navara goes for a different plan. He plays the move c5, always a useful move as well, and maybe preparing this knight maneuver. White plays h5, and black has a choice to make if he wants to stop this pawn from reaching h6 or if he wants to allow it. Navara stopped it with h6, which is very double-edged. I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it's a big mistake, but it's very, very risky. First of all, it provides a hook for white pawn pushes after g4, g5 to open the king side. And secondly, if you have to defend against that by playing f6, then your light squares are really very weakened on the king side. So I'm not 100% sure about h6. I believe it made sense to still play like, for example, Karyakin did, go knight f8, meet h6 with g6, then play f6, knight e6, and take it from there. h6 was played, and Wei Yi, of course, doesn't need to be asked twice to start an attack. Now he commits his king to the queen side, long castles, and he intends to follow up with g4. Another crucial decision for Navara where to put his knight. As I've already mentioned, he went for the knight b8 plan, which is very logical. He won the knight here to leave this bishop's view open. But the knight, at least short term, is also very far away from the action on the king side, and I believe this plan was a little slow and he should still have gone for knight f8. When after g4, this pawn can't really be taken because the g file would be opening. Black should go for a defensive setup with f6, knight to e6, and sit tight. He might be a little worse, but it's not the end of the world. So what's the difference? After knight b8, Wei Yi played rook dg1. He could have started with g4, but he wants his rook behind the pawn anyway. So he goes here. Navara concludes his maneuver with knight c6, and here comes the g-pawn. Now g5 is a lethal threat. You cannot allow this by any means, because if this pawn reaches g5 without any sacrifices made, then black will just get checkmated. Therefore, black only has one move, the move f6, fighting against g5. But here we see Wei Yi showing his true colors. He's not afraid of sacrificing material, and he gives up a piece to open up the black king. This move, first of all, it's a move you consider. I was doing live commentary with Peter Svidler, and Peter Svidler mentioned this move far in advance. But of course, you can't just give up a piece and hope for the best. You have to calculate it very precisely, and we're gonna see what Wei Yi has in mind. After f takes g5, the idea is, of course, to give up the piece and open the g file, else g5 wouldn't have made a lot of sense. And questions arise for black. First of all, the direct h takes g5, bishop takes g5 is already tricky. If you played, let's say, bishop e7 here, then there's trouble in many a line. The easiest one, maybe bishop takes e7, and after queen takes e7, h6. Now this queen can go to h5 in one go, and the black king is not going to survive. Similar things could be said about rook takes e7, h6. Therefore, Navara correctly decides to first play a little Zwischenzug activate his knight, which maybe can join the defense from e6, maybe serves another purpose, goes knight d4, attacking the white queen, and Wei Yi very quietly and very correctly goes queen back to d1. He knows he wants this queen on this diagonal, so it can later go to h5 after the h6 push. Now black has nothing better than accepting the piece. If he went, for example, b5 after knight takes d6, c takes d6, knight to f3, white is not even material down, and there is this mark on g7 which he can just focus on attacking, and black faces a very, very unpleasant situation. So in practice, the best shot is to take this piece. So far so good. Bishop takes g5 is also an obvious move. And now, yeah, white has only one pawn for the sacrifice piece. But if we look at his army, all his pieces are very ready to join the battle, especially after the push h6. So the number of attackers he has on the king side outweighs the number of defenders black has, which often is a good sign. Still, you gotta calculate. The only move for black here is bishop e7. If he tried, let's say, queen d7, then white just crashes through. The prettiest way is bishop f6, targeting this pawn, and bishop f8 is met by h6. And the floodgates are opening. hg7, queen h5, if g6, h7 just wins. Well, the moves, maybe queen h5 is even more brutal, intending to take here. No surprises, doesn't work. So bishop e7 is forced, and here we've reached at the reason I was very impressed with this game, the star move, in my opinion, which Wei Yi had probably seen from far away. If you reach this position, the moves you're first considering, or that I would first consider, are bishop to h6 or bishop takes e7. But here after bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, h6, black has g5, and slightly surprisingly, there's no real breakthrough for white because his knight can go back to e6, and it's not so easy to open any files. Lines, one of those. Bishop h6 looks very tempting as well, but after bishop h6, while it might be interesting for white as well, black has a very strong and hidden defense, the move king h7. Now rook g7, king h6, there's no mate, and if bishop takes g7, black has this Zwischenschach, bishop g5 check, targeting the bishop, and there is nothing obvious for white. The computer gives king b1, king takes g7, rook g5, queen g5, and rook to g1, winning the queen, but black would have two rooks and a piece for it, which is more than enough. So for example, after knight e6, rook takes, knight takes g5, white might be slightly better. The computer likes white here, but I'm not sure, and I'm sure this was not Wei Yi's intention. So what did he do? He played another very quiet move, and yeah, to me that is the star move of the game, because after sacrificing a piece, making such quiet moves and understanding that your attack is strong enough without any direct action is not easy unless you're a natural born attacker like the Chinese youngster. He goes bishop e3, and he understood that the combination of his threats of h6, maybe knight takes e5, will just leave the black king defenseless. There's a couple lines one could consider here. King h7 we've seen in the last line, intending to meet h6 with g6 or g5, but then white just quietly takes a pawn, goes knight takes e5, and he has the plan to go knight to g6 followed by h6, which is totally lethal. After the g pawn has been blocked, h6 will just lead to checkmate. So king h7 doesn't work, therefore after bishop e3, David Navara played bishop f6, the most natural move, keeping an eye on g7 and e5, and Wei Yi continues with h6. Once again, priority number one for black should be to keep the king side closed, but he did not play the move g5 here, and the question is why. I believe that Wei Yi had anticipated this and had prepared a very strong move, because the obvious move queen to h5 doesn't end things very cleanly at the very least, because after g4 it's not so easy for white to break through. Queen g6 is just a check, the king goes to h8, and rook takes g4, bishop takes g4, there's also nothing direct. Therefore white has to act more directly. Bishop takes g5 is the trick. Bishop takes g5, and here f4, very nice move, exploiting this pin along the g-file, so e takes f4 is forced, and now white goes queen h5, and the situation has changed, because his bishop no longer covers the g7 square, which means white has a huge threat of going queen g6 followed by queen g7. Black tries to defend against that, let's say by going knight e6. Then there is the next blow, rook takes g5 check. And after knight g5, once again, this is checkmate. Therefore, black has to go queen g5. And now Harry the h-pawn decides the game by going h7. When king g7, h8 check is checkmate after a couple more moves. While king h8, queen takes e8 is hardly an improvement. So I'm sure both players saw that, and therefore Navara decided to not go g5, but to go knight e6, trying to reinforce... Oh no, sorry, he didn't go knight e6, he went rook e7, same idea, but let's look at knight to e6 first, trying to reinforce g7. However, if you can't avoid the opening of the h-file, you're just in trouble, and here white's attack flows very natural. h7 and knight g7, for example, queen h5, threatening too many mean things. There's just no defense. One line being b5, queen h7 check. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing up my lines here, even though queen h7 is also good, but even stronger is bishop h6, threatening to take here, followed by queen h7. There's nothing black can do about it. For example, takes, check, king f7, queen check, king e6, rook h6, and the end is very near. So Navara tried rook e7 instead, hoping for the best, but if you have to do this same scenario, just hg7, followed by queen h5, and there's not much you can do about it. Rook takes g7, best chance. If bishop g7, I start sounding like a broken record, this will just collapse. Rook takes, queen h5, no surprises, no points for guessing that move. Bishop to e6, Navara tries to at least develop some of his queen side to maybe bring in some fresh defenders, but it is too little too late. The alternative knight e6 didn't help, however. There's a couple of ways that lead to Rome. The prettiest one maybe is knight takes e5, just controlling this f7 square, threatening queen f7 checkmate or queen h8 checkmate. Black would be forced to take here, and without this bishop, white still has more than enough firepower to break through on the king side. Could make a couple more moves here, but just believe me, this will not end well for the black king. So bishop e6 was tried instead, but once again, it's already a matter of taste which win to choose, and Wei Yi does a thing strong players often do. When they see one line that leads to a winning position, they don't look for a better line. You will see the computer bar slightly collapsing after white's next move, but he had just calculated this is winning and didn't bother to look for anything else. He goes bishop h6, queen h8 check, for example, was also winning, or knight takes e5, but bishop h6 is perfectly adequate, just getting rid of some of the defenders around the black king. The reason the computer likes this less than other moves is that black could have reached an endgame with the move queen to e8. However, it's not a very nice endgame because here white just wins by being left with more units. Bishop takes g7, queen takes h5, bishop takes f6. Important discover check. Let's say king to f7, rook takes h5. At the moment white is a rook up, so black better recapture one of those. He has knight e2 check, getting one rook, but it doesn't change the outcome. King d2, knight takes g1, bishop takes e5, for example. And white has two pawns, two extra pawns, and the activity. So it is a completely winning position, and Wei Yi was probably more than satisfied with it and didn't look for anything else. The game took a similar course, but an even worse version for black. Navara played bishop to f7 instead of queen e8. When after bishop takes g7, bishop takes h5, bishop f6, same trick we've seen, this discovered check. White once again wins his queen back with a lot of benefits. King f7, bishop d8, here after rook d8, white just an exchange up, rook g5 or any move really. Therefore Navara tries the same idea, knight e2 check, king to b1. Note he doesn't go to d2 because he doesn't want to allow a knight check on f3 in this line. King b1, the king is fine where he is. Knight takes g1 and bishop takes c7. Here the difference is that black now even loses a piece because both the knight on g1 and the bishop on h5 are under attack. Therefore Navara saw no reason to continue the game and resigned. A very nice attacking game by Wei Yi. First of all, a nice opening idea, even though it was played in a similar position. This plan with h4, h5 Navara didn't react ideally. This knight b8 and h6 was a little too risky. And then Wei Yi just showed what he can do in a sharp position. g5 and the piece sacrifice many people would have considered, but yeah, as mentioned, the star move to me is the quiet queen d1 and then the quiet bishop e3, just understanding that black is defenseless in the long term against all the attackers. So Wei Yi wins his first game, is on 5 out of 9 in his first real super tournament in the Wijk aan Masters. We'll see how things continue for him, but so far a very promising start for the Chinese youngster, and David Navara keeps providing great entertainment, exciting game every round, even though he's not going to be happy with the outcome of this one. Thank you guys for watching. If you want to watch the live commentary for the Tata Steel Masters done by yours truly and Super Grandmaster Peter Svidler, join us on Chess24. Thank you. See you soon. Bye bye.